Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. I thought I'd certainly not offer the final word on the 49ers draft, the 2025 draft, where their first five players were defensive players. Certainly won't be the last word, but I wanted to add something because John Lynch last week went on the Unbuttoned podcast. That's Chris Sims and Ahmed Fareed were hosting that. And so he had some interesting things to say about the draft. And one of the things that we had talked about was that, yes, the 49ers did have their first five picks, all defensive players. And I called it the Robert Saleh draft. But it certainly sounded as if that wasn't the way it was necessarily planned. In fact, that John Lynch believed that Mykel Williams would go number 9 overall to the Saints. And if that were the case, he said more than likely the 49ers would have taken an offensive player at number 11. So let's kind of go through this. And I know some people were like, well, the 49ers reached to get these players, Nick Martin, Upton Stout. And my point would be is that a reach is when you take a player at a specific position just to take that player at a position, even though he's not on your draft board, lining up to be the next player selected. So we don't know how the 49ers stack their draft board. So I guess there's an element that we have to believe what they're saying, but it's not, well, these people in the media had these players ranked somewhere. 49ers aren't following people in the media's draft board, um, even though, clearly we know better. I know better than NFL teams who have, a dozen scouts and interview these guys and know everything about them. But where the 49ers said, or what John Lynch said was that, yeah, they could have taken an offensive lineman, but the way the draft lined up, where they picked those first five picks were defensive lineman, linebacker, nickelback, and then they came back with another defensive lineman. So, I just wanted to kind of go through it and kind of look at the draft and see how, if things had gone differently, things might have turned out differently for the 49ers. Things going differently in front of the 49ers. That's what I mean. So anyway, Mykel Williams was somebody that the 49ers felt like that he would already be gone when it came time for them to pick at 11. And they felt like, according to John Lynch, that the Saints were more than likely going to take him. Also, the Saints felt like Kelvin Banks, the offensive lineman, the offensive tackle for Texas, might go in front of where they picked him. So when Kelvin Banks was there, the Saints took him, which then meant that Mykel Williams would fall to the 49ers at number 11 overall. And if so, let's take this one step further. If the Saints had taken Mykel Williams instead of Kelvin Banks, then would the 49ers have taken Kelvin Banks at number 11? That is certainly kind of what John Lynch suggested without saying it. But when you look at who the other offensive linemen the 49ers could have taken at number 11 if Mykel Williams had been out there, I know this is a lot of ifs and buts. It's ifs and buts were candy and nuts. Every day would be Christmas. But the next offensive player taken was Tyler Booker, the guard from Alabama. He goes to the Cowboys. I don't think the 49ers would have taken a guard there. Certainly don't know that for sure, but I don't think so. The next two offensive players the 49ers could have taken, next two offensive players drafted were 14, Tyler Warren by Indianapolis. And then the other one at number 18, Seattle took Gray Zabel. So I would think that my somewhat educated guess is that, yes, the 49ers would have selected Kelvin Banks at number 11 if Mykel Williams was not on the board. Now, their next pick was in the second round, and the only offensive lineman that was getting closer to where the 49ers picked at 43 was Junior Savinaya, an offensive lineman that the Miami Dolphins took at 37. 49ers stayed at 43. They didn't make any trades. in this draft. In fact, John Lynch had something to say on the Chris Sims podcast that they did a lot of trades early on, but they've learned that it's better to be patient, let the draft come to you instead of going out and getting somebody. He did say that they had about 8 or 10 calls on draft day, on the first day of the draft, about either moving up from number 11 with the purpose of getting Mykel Williams, or moving back. They ended up staying there. And they ended up staying there in their second round as well, and got Alfred Collins, defensive tackle. The only offensive lineman that they probably could have considered at 43 would have been Ariante Ursary, the tackle from Minnesota. He was selected 5 spots later at number 48. But another interesting thing was John Lynch talked about when they're in the draft room and everybody's in there, the owner's in there, the scouts are in there and whatnot. After the first 2 picks that the 49ers made, uh, John Lynch relayed a scene where he and Shanahan went to Lynch's office. And what Shanahan said was, "Dude, I think I just exhaled for the first time in 3 months." So, in other words, the 49ers lost so many defensive linemen in the first stages of free agency. Heck, the first day of free agency, they released Javon Hargrave. They released Leonard Floyd. They released Malik Collins. And so those are 3 starters that they had to replace. 3 guys who were starters from, opening week of last season. And to replace them with those 2 defensive linemen lined up about as perfectly as the 49ers could have hoped. In fact, they said that if you lined up kind of a best case scenario, that's what the 49ers said that they wanted right there. Mykel Williams and Alfred Collins with the first 2 picks. Again, we'll take that at face value. There's not a team in the NFL that says, "Oh man, we really didn't want this guy, but we got him anyway." So again, take that with a grain of salt. Now, where it gets interesting, I think, is the third round, because when all the talk about the offensive linemen, I see the third round as being the area where the 49ers believed even more than the first round with Kelvin Banks. But I think third round was where I think the 49ers believed that they were going to get an offensive lineman. And I think it's pretty easy to kind of see where it stacks up. And it wasn't necessarily with their first pick in the third round. That came at number 75 overall, because that was Nick Collins, by the way, a guy the 49ers really pinpointed as being a guy with the aggressiveness, the tenacity, the hunger, the fire to replace Dre Greenlaw. So even though Nick Martin was injured for a lot of his final season, what he showed as a junior really impressed the 49ers. And I think they felt like this is a guy at 75 that would be perfect for them to step in and start year one. Because let's face it, the position next to Fred Warner last year, 49ers linebackers were really thin. And so Nick Martin, somebody that is certainly being thought of as a player coming in from Oklahoma State who can step in and play immediately and make an immediate contribution. So the 3 offensive linemen that were taken before Nick Martin were, anywhere from like 20 to 18 spots before the 49ers picked. So I don't think that those were guys the 49ers were thinking would get there, or guys that, I don't think they were holding their breath for any of these guys. And it went boom, 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 NFC North. Green Bay, Anthony Belton, North Carolina State. I think somebody on the 49ers. In fact, I'd say all 3 of these guys were on the 49ers radar. They had to be, because they kind of fit the profile of what the 49ers look for with offensive linemen. So Anthony Belton from Green Bay at 56 overall. Chicago took Ozzie Trapillo from Boston College. And then at 57, Detroit took Tate Ratledge from Georgia. Okay, so then the 49ers take Nick Martin, and their next spot was 25 spots later. Next pick was 25 spots later. That's where the 49ers took Upton Stout. I do believe that the 49ers would have taken one of these 2 guys that the Las Vegas Raiders selected at 98 and 99 overall. So right before the 49ers picked Las Vegas took Caleb Rogers from Texas Tech, an offensive lineman who did visit the 49ers. So that tells you right there he was on their radar. Those mid-round guys, first round, sometimes you get some smoke screens, but teams aren't going to use smoke screens on, third, fourth, fifth round draft picks. So Caleb Rogers, certainly somebody the 49ers could have been, or probably were interested in to take at number 100. And then right after Vegas took Caleb Rogers, they also took Charles Grant, offensive tackle from William and Mary. There were some rumblings the 49ers were interested in him as well. So I also know that the third round was kind of the sweet spot where the 49ers looked at Nickelback or were looking, seriously considering Nickelback. And that's obvious because at number 11 or number 100, they did take Upton Stout, Nickelback from West Virginia, a guy who, is one of the shorter players in this draft, 5'8.5", I believe he is, but living up to his name, very stout, hard hitter, supremely confident, and somebody the 49ers are expecting to step in day one and be a nickelback, give the 49ers their first really true nickelback who can step in and play since what K'Wan Williams was with the team. So that was kind of my take. The 49ers did not address the offensive line with a draft pick until the seventh round, their next to last pick, and that was a guard, Connor Colby from Iowa. And then even in free agency, undrafted free agency, the only offensive lineman they got there was Drew Moss from Colorado State. So where the 49ers decided to add and eventually enacted their plan to strengthen the offensive line, their depth and whatnot, was in veteran free agency. After the draft was over, when those picks no longer count as far as compensatory, when the 49ers signed DJ Humphries, longtime starter at left tackle for the Arizona Cardinals, and then a couple of journeyman type players, Andre Dillard, a former first round pick of the Philadelphia Eagles in 2019. Andre Dillard comes in, spent the last couple years with Tennessee and Green Bay, and then Nicholas Petit Farrar, right tackle, who has started quite a few games in his career. He was a third round pick in 2022 of the Tennessee Titans. Started 10 games last year for the Titans, but I don't think any of those guys are coming in to be starters. They're there for depth, they're there for competition. And so that's the way the 49ers either a combination of how they chose to address the offensive line this offseason, or maybe you could say how they were kind of forced to address the offensive line this offseason in sticking to their draft board and not going out and taking a guy who might have been down on their list. And that's how the 49ers ended up with 5 defensive players in their first 5 picks of the draft. Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Give it a like, give it a comment, and that is it for now.